Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 99%. My name is Jesse Vonderchek, and I am here with Marilyn. Whew, that was rough. I haven't done that in a while. Hello, Marilyn. How are you?
Hey everybody, Marilyn Chakota. You can find everything with me at mcc.coach. Good to have you here, Jesse. We missed you last week, or was it last week or the week before that we recorded? We had a great conversation with Eddie and Gary, and but we missed you. And you know what you were saying with the intro there? I realized when I did that, I was like, oh, I've never done the intro. And I totally messed it up. I just started saying hi and talking to those guys, and then I was like, wait a minute. So there you go. I was like, oh, I don't actually ever do that. That's Jesse's job.
Yeah, I've got one job, and it's to say the intro, and then after that, I'm kind of done. So, so I
No,
feel like I've done my job this time. But
no shit.
thank you very much for carrying the show last podcast. You guys did a great job, and yeah, I thoroughly appreciate it. And I was sad not to be there because there's some great folks, and yeah, it was a cool story. So yeah, great job.
Cool. Cool. What have you been
Uh,
up to? We missed you. So you've been let's talk about this Ironman preparation that you've got going on. What race you're doing and a little bit of story behind it.
yeah, so I am getting ready for Ironman Tune or Ironman Switzerland, especially if you're in America, it's probably just called Ironman Switzerland. And that is now it's in 2 weeks. Whew, okay. 2.5 weeks. So yeah, it's coming up quick. And and yeah, so it turns out that Ironman training takes a fair amount of time, like we were talking about before we started recording. So I've been I've been kind of trying to knuckle down and get in kind of the end of my prep here the last few weeks to get ready for Ironman Switzerland.
Nice. And how you feeling about it? And this is such a great
Whoa.
question for me to ask you with today.
Yeah, what a tee up. Because today we are going to talk about what that means when, what it means to be ready for a race and yeah, how to kind of navigate that idea of race readiness and what it means to you based on all the factors. And so yeah, I'll try and give you a real answer based on those parameters. And yeah, I feel like things are starting to come together pretty well. I One of the things I have trouble doing is comparing myself to Jesse from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, which is a lot of years when you start going back that far. And it's, I can't train the same way that I did back then, um, for a lot of reasons, but one of them is mainly time. I used to train a fair amount more than I can right now. And so it's easy to get caught in that trap of like, well, if I'm not doing the same preparation, am I ready to race? But I will say that I've had some sessions that are pretty good. And I feel like, in my advanced age, if I'm if I'm hitting the sessions and the intensity is good on the intense workouts, then I don't feel like I need the same amount of volume that I have done in the past, especially in this phase in like the last, kind of 6 weeks of training. And so yeah, I've hit the intensity on some of the sessions that makes me feel like things are in a pretty good spot. Um, I've gotten a few good long rides and a few good long runs that have left me feeling decently confident. And it's kind of talk about that readiness as well, is that one of the things about this race, it is pretty hilly. I think it's got 7,000 feet of elevation. And so it means that I'm planning on it being kind of a solo effort on the bike. And so, which is good for me right now because, again, being 44, putting out kind of steady power for, 4 hours and 45 minutes is a lot easier for me than to say try and go race in Arizona or something where it's going to be super surgy and like the group is going to be attacking and going. And I feel like I'm not in a position to be ready to do a race like that given my training. But that is not the race I'm preparing for. So I am ready for like the race to unfold in the way in which I'm going to let the race unfold for myself. And and that's going to mean that I've got to execute the race in the manner which suits the way that I prepared, right? I can't like have a I can't swim above my pay grade and then decide to ride with those guys that I swim with because my fitness just isn't really quite there right now in order to do that. So so my expectations for how I'm going to race and then my race execution has got to be based on my current fitness, which is again my plan. But I think that's kind of one of some of the things we're going to talk about is like what that means, right? To be race ready and then and then what that means for like your expectations for the race. And yeah, I'm feeling like feeling pretty ready to kind of like execute my day on the course.
I think what's really interesting about some of the things you said there, and if you're really listening, is, I think every athlete and every coach has certain like cues or workouts or things that give them that feeling to say, yes, I'm ready, right? Like, is it, and for you, it sounds like that can change based on race terrain, race dynamics, and so it should, right? It's like what each person, what each athlete qualifies as I feel ready probably means something different in each person's mind. And it's good for each athlete and every coach to know what that means to a person, right? Like, I've heard everything from certain people to say they like to nail a certain type of session at least once or twice and then they feel ready, or they have, and then recognizing how is that going to change based on another important thing you said. You're not the Jesse you were 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So are you looking for a certain session that feels a certain way or plays out a certain way that you execute a couple times in training, and you're searching for it to be in line with the athlete that you currently are, or are you searching for it to feel the same way as it did 15 years ago? And how has that changed, evolved, shaped? You've got a lot of miles and a lot of races and a lot of experience under your belt since then. And then, but also there's age. So like, yes, you're much more experienced and you have a lot more miles in your legs, but you're also 15 years older. So like, how does that all change? And then, so do those sessions change, right? Like, and I think, and they can get pretty technical as well, as if people track data, there is, scores that give you, your how good is your readiness in terms of like, you have to be logging every single thing, and then there's a lot of things that aren't taken into account when you are logging that stuff. So I tend to use those as loose guidelines that can help in terms of having someone ready for a race. Like, they like to see but that is a thing for some people. They like to see certain numbers within their data that tell them that they're ready to race. Some people, it's searching for a certain session that they're able to nail 2 or 3 times. I know for me, one thing with Ironmans, when I was living in Boulder, Colorado, and racing professionally, I knew if I could run the Magnolia Road up at altitude from start to finish, out and back, and feel pretty good, that I was going to have pretty good run legs for the marathon and an Ironman. I also knew if I could do at the Scott Carpenter pool, that doesn't exist anymore in Boulder, but it was a long course pool. It was shallow. It had a slide that pushed water. So it was a super slow long course pool, but it was long course meters. And if I could do 4,100s, holding 130 or better and leaving on 135 or 140, I was going to have a pretty decent swim around an hour for me in an Ironman. Like, I had these markers that I knew if I could nail those sessions, I was ready to race. So the interesting, I'd love to hear more specifics on what it is in sessions that you looked for in the past and what those look like now, to say like, hey, yeah, that is a marker to let me know I'm ready to go and race.
Um,
Excuse me.
yeah, no, those are good questions. And so it's kind of funny because for the last maybe 8 weeks, my power meter hasn't been working. And I'm pretty sure I just need a new battery in one of the sides, and I just haven't bothered to change it. So like I've got heart rate and I've got speed on the bike, but speed around where I live is somewhat irrelevant because the roads are never flat. But I've been going basically off feel on my rides and feel off on my runs for basically this entire build. And so I'm sorry for all the people that wanted me to give you a bunch of data on like power numbers and how the power is going, because I literally have zero actual power data. I mean, run, I've got a little bit of paces, but I basically only run on dirt and gravel roads around here. And so it's really been like the majority of it has been off of feel. And then but I'll deep dive into that a little bit more. But swimming's also been different too, because here I'm basically only swimming long course meters. There's one short course meter pool I swim at, but all my like reference points are in short course yards. And so I'm trying to do some converting to kind of like see where I'm at. Um, and then the other curveball here with swimming is that the outdoor pools are all kind of cold. So I end up wearing my wetsuit a fair amount of times in the pool. And for me, for this race coming up, like I've got, one race I'm doing this year and it's going to be a wetsuit swim. So I feel like it's kind of fine. But otherwise, I would kind of say that's like a little bit of cheating because, um, swimming in a wetsuit in a pool kind of feels like cheating. Uh, but, uh, but,
Or it's practice in your wetsuit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you do that a few times and just practicing in your wetsuit. And when I'm doing that every swim, then
It's maybe cheating a little.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I have done a few sets, and like, one set is somewhat of a classic, and just the 10 400s on a decently tight interval. Well, I've been giving myself 30 seconds rest, or I guess in this training block I've only done it once, so I don't want to make it sound like I've done that set a bunch of times. But I was still kind of able to descend all the 400s. And basically that, like, the idea of me being able to do a longer session and descend it and feel good at the end is something that I derive a lot of confidence from. And it's partly because it's actually kind of the opposite of what I used to do in my training in Tucson, in that, like, I would do a group swim, like the master's group swim, and I would be swimming in a lane slightly too fast for me. So the first 600 of the 1,800-yard main set would be really fast, and then I would kind of fizzle fade, and it's about just holding on. And that was good for me to get the punch I needed to start out hard with like with the swim group, but maybe not as good for me holding strong the entire Ironman. And usually, if I can get out in the group, it doesn't matter. But so now I've kind of switched that on my head and said, okay, well, I do some sessions where I make sure I have enough pop to make to make the group I will make, which anymore will not be the front group. It will be the second or third group, depending on if there's a lead group or just the front group. But I make sure I've got enough pop to do that, and then enough strength and enough durability to kind of maintain a high pace to the whole thing. So that's definitely changed over time with trying to be faster towards the end. And that's kind of how I've trained with my cycling this year as well, because another common theme of my racing in the past, like I was kind of mentioning Ironman Arizona, is you get out on the first loop of that bike course and it's really fast. Like the course is empty, there's no wind yet. And so the first loop is always super hot. And not that that's the only race I did, but that's kind of the style in which I prepared for racing, was getting ready for the first bit to be kind of full on, and then everyone to settle in a little bit later. And so I do things like the shootout where you ride kind of above threshold for 40 minutes, and then I would kind of ride aerobic um, after that. And what I've been doing here is doing the opposite, where like the other day I did like 4 hours of kind of like, zone two, upper aerobic, whatever you want to call it, steady riding. And then I did the last hour at what felt like kind of a race effort. And again, with no power meter, but I feel like I'm pretty good at judging Ironman effort. And I was able to finish like the last hour of a 5-ish hour ride at Ironman effort. And I felt pretty good after. And so that's kind of, I've done some rides similar to that, where either I'll do like some threshold in the beginning and then try and ride steady, or kind of do a stronger bit at the end. And it is kind of totally different to the riding I was doing 10 years ago, but it I know how I feel at the end of those sessions, and I feel like that's what it's about for me now, is like I feel pretty good. I can hold watts at the end, and I feel like uh that's a decently good feeling for me. And the running's kind of been similar where like in this build, I think I've done like I don't know, 2 20-mile runs and then like a 17-mile run. I've got one more, I think 16-mile run coming up. But I do like the first 8 or 10 miles would be kind of like hilly trails where I think I did a 20-mile run this morning and it was like 1,800 feet of gain in the first bit. And then I did the last, I don't know what it was, like it's just kind of whenever I got to the flat bit at the end, which maybe was the last 10 miles, was kind of like a steadier Ironman effort where I feel like I was able to roll pretty strong and finish that feeling pretty good towards the end of the 20 miles. Um, and so yeah, that's kind of like how my training has looked leading into this. And again, it's like actually the opposite, but how I feel during the sessions is kind of the what I've been looking for. And that's what I can kind of think back on to previous sessions that were different, but I know how the power felt and I know how I felt towards the end. And and so yeah, that's kind of how I've been gearing my sessions now. And like I mentioned at the beginning though, it is because I know that the race I'm going to have on in Ironman 2 and is going to be like essentially a fast age grouper race, right? Because I'm probably not going to be participating in any of the dynamics of the field in front of me, and I'm just going to go steady and strong, and hopefully I'll be able to chew through some people by the end of the race, but probably not get involved in any of the dynamics that I would have 100% gotten involved with 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's good to hear like what's going on in your mind when, because like I was saying, each person thinks about if I feel a certain way, or if I see this marker, or if my body composition hits, this realm, or these things. There's these little markers that people are looking for to say, are they ready? As a coach, I generally look at like an athlete and say, okay, well, where are we at current? If someone wants to do a race, and we're using Ironman example, but it could be half Ironman or Ironman or Olympic distance. But we look at the event and we say, okay, well, where's your current fitness? And depending on where it's at, and where it's been at over the last 6 months, year, the last 3 years, we can look at how long does this very specific build into the race need to be. So if someone's had some time off, like say they've been injured or they've just been away from the sport, obviously that build's going to be a lot longer. And I think there's a little bit um, of a misunderstanding sometimes when people, they look at an event, they get excited about it, and they look at, maybe people's attention spans are getting shorter, or maybe there's not a clear enough understanding of how much fitness is, how fitness builds and how much fitness is needed to complete these events. Maybe there's um, a little bit of a lack of respect for how hard these events starting to trickle into the culture a little bit. I'm not sure, but sometimes I feel like people look at the events and they think, well, I've got like 3 4 weeks to train, I'm good to go, right? But meanwhile, if they look at their last 6 months or year or even 2 years, they really haven't done that much training, and certainly not any specific training. And so that's when you have to have a real conversation and say like, okay, let's look at these things. Like, can you back up the volume and the distance that's required to even do this event? And if your answer is no, then we need to start there. And how long that takes to build up depends on all of those things, right? It depends on a lot of things. Depends on how the athlete responds to the training, depends what they're coming into it with, how much, all of those kinds of things. And if they're already at a pretty good base level for a number of years, that step could be, it's already there, right? Like, okay, well, we've been training for the last 3 years at a pretty good amount capacity. And so how many weeks do we need of race specific preparation, and what kind of sessions do we need to hit and numbers we need to say that are in line with the goals that they've set? Like, that's the other thing too, right? Is, are the goals in line with what, when they look at their preparation, where they're coming from, right? Like, I want to, if someone comes to me and says, I want to qualify for worlds, or I want a podium in my age group, well, okay, that is fantastic. And that's an awesome goal. And if they say, well, I want to do it in 8 weeks time from now, but they've had the last 6 months to a year pretty much nearly off, like doing a little bit of exercising. Let's say they're the general fitness enthusiast is exercising maybe between 8 and 10 hours a week, we've got a lot of work to do before we're ready to be like a podium at a half Ironman and certainly at an Ironman, right? And there needs to be that really clear understanding. Like, can we cover the distance and can we back that up week after week and not be completely wrecked from it, not be completely tired? I know I've just personally started back just triathlon training and not just predominantly cycling, where I'm saying, like, my only goal right now is, can I run a triathlon schedule week in and week out for the next 6 months? And can I just handle that, like swim, bike, and run? I'm not even looking at, like, yes, I would like to do some half Ironmans next year, but the first step that is I have been predominantly cycling with a little bit of running and swimming trickled in here and there every now and then. But to actually run a triathlon schedule for months on end and build that fitness, I'm not even like, oh, I want to go to an event and try and podium in my age group. I'd be, delusional to be thinking about that at the moment. Right now, I'm like, can I, for the next 6 months, just in my life, roll a triathlon schedule again, swim, bike, run, a little bit of strength training, and do that. And at first, you're pretty smoked from it. It takes a while to get used to it again and adapt to that. So I think that, that expectation of like, where are you now, where are you coming into it, and then how far away is the event, and then what are those things that you're looking for to say, yes, I am ready? Like, can you nail those key, can you handle that? Can you handle the volume to cover the distance and do that comfortably and not have it completely wreck you and make you tired? Once you can do that, then we can start to get specific towards like the actual training towards the event, as well as, you know, the intensities and the sets, and maybe there's a couple of races where you don't even get to those, but it's a year down the road before you start to get to very specific sessions. Like, a lot of people that want to do their first Ironman will just first make sure that we have the durability and the endurance to do the marathon at the end of an Ironman. And then over time, eventually we get to where we're doing working sets within 18-mile runs, or maybe a 20-mile run with working sets. But that could be like a 3-4 year process, right? Before they're ready for those kinds of sessions. It's like, can you just run for 2 hours or even 2.5 hours a couple of times, and then that might set you up for a half Ironman, right? Like, there's these checkpoints along the way. And I think maybe people have lost touch with that a little bit sometimes. And we were talking earlier about the opposite end of that spectrum. You're using an example of an opposite of that.
Um, Yeah, well, first of all, congrats on getting back into a triathlon schedule. And I think that's a really important thing you said, is that like basically you're just looking at like laying down a foundation of like consistency in all three sports, and some strength, which is obviously super important to as we get to be our age to stay healthy. So good job. Um, but like that is the foundation, right? And then at some point, like you said, 6 months down the road, then you could say, okay, I've done this consistently for a while. Maybe now it's time to think about, like, can I actually think about preparing for a race? And that initial 6 months, which in a lot of the examples you gave, it is the piece that people tend to skip over, right? That allows you to actually do the training that they want to do in order to race. Um, so yeah, I think that's a great plan. Congratulations. Welcome back. Um,
Thanks. We'll see. My only goal right now is like, hey, let's see if I can do this, and that's a fun part of it too. It's like I said to myself, I wonder if I can still do this and roll it, and yeah, of course I can, but it'll be an interesting process. Anyways,
but yeah, and then I feel like welcome back to like the training, not even like the idea of racing, and I think that's because yeah, I mean that's kind of what I'm looking at, and as I look towards the future, so yeah, I like it. Um, but then you talked about the having the kind of the race ready conversation before you even start preparing for the race, and I think that's a really great place to start. And then, one of the things we were talking about again before is like when people ask you if you're ready for a race, in the week before, like right now when we're talking 2 weeks before my Ironman, or even 2 days before, when everyone's like, "Hey, are you ready? How you feeling?" Like kind of that canned question, and then so what is the answer? You can give a canned answer, but then what's the answer really? And I think one of the things you talked about is that like, you when you start preparing for a race, you can set your expectations for like how ready you want to be for the race and what that looks like as far as like how you're going to perform in it, whether it's like outcome goals or like your internal goals or whatever you're going to lay out. But you have those conversations when you begin the training, and then probably at some point before you actually execute the race, like you look at how the training is done, and then are those expectations still realistic. But I think that kind of needs to be the framework for like the "are you ready" question. Like, did you check the boxes you needed to check, and are you ready to execute the race that you want to race? And those are kind of the conversations that, like, you talked about, that I think are really good to have with your athletes. Again, 6 months out, right before, make sure their execution strategy lines up with their expectations and lines up with what they're thinking. Like, because I think that self-talk is also really important, right? Like, if you're asking me if I'm ready to win Ironman 2, and the answer is no. And if I get on course and I try and swim and ride like I want to try and win, then I'm going to have a pretty long bad day out there, and it's going to look like I wasn't ready because I wasn't ready to try and do that. But I am ready to go have like a B- day, which would be great. And so I guess lining those things up, like your kind of mental answer to being race ready, your expectations, what that headspace is like, and then how that plays into how you actually execute on race day, um, is all packaged into like, are you ready to race? And it's like, well, yes, based on my expectations for the race. And yeah, before I was talking about an athlete who used to always kind of sandbag, and you ask him if he's ready, and he talked to you about his niggles, or sorry, I'm losing it, or if he hasn't been that consistent, talking about like things aren't perfect. And then you get to the race course and just have a flyer, and everyone's like, well, what was all that talk for? And it was like actually him getting in kind of a negative headspace was how he raced really well. But I think that's more of an anomaly. And I think in general, people race better when they're positive. So that's why I feel like having your expectations line up with that race readiness, being able to give people a really positive answer, like, yes, I am ready to race. I am ready to like meet the expectations I have set for myself, and not and kind of avoid that oh, like nay or nay happened, because like nay or nay always happens, whatever it is, right? And nay or nay is an official term, so I'm going to keep using it. Um, and like life always gets in the way of preparation. Like, I mean, like my bike was just in the shop for 4 weeks, and like that didn't really come up when I was talking about my race readiness, because like now it's here and it's fine. I was riding my gravel bike and it's no big deal. Um, but if you let these things get in your brain as like roadblocks to whether or not you're ready to race, then on race day, they're going to be roadblocks when you're actually trying to execute the race. Um,
Yeah, that's a really good point because it gets really hard out there. And if all you've been saying to yourself is like all these things that came up for you in training, then those are going to be the first excuses you have to slow down, stop, um, you know, whatever it might be, instead of just, well and truly into the race, focus on, did I put in the preparation that is in line with the execution I'm trying to do right now? And then at some point, obviously, it's always going to get hard out there. So pulling from just what do you have in your heart to give that day, there's going to be a piece of that as well. And that just comes down to, loving being out there and pushing yourself and finding out how much you have to give, no matter what your preparation was. And so I think it's important what you're talking about. There's that mental preparation piece of, if you're focused on the things that weren't exactly as you wanted in your preparation, those are going to quickly become the first excuses that you make when things get tough in the race. So it's best to just not forget about those things, but like you said, it wasn't even something you brought up. It was like, it's just part of part of week to week, month to month life and something that you had to deal with, but you're still getting the training in that you need to do to have the race that you want. And that's the main thing. And that's what you're focused on. And so, when you go in there, you're not even thinking about, what bike you were on for what weeks or whatever. You got your TT bike now and ready to rock and roll, and you've done the sessions, and that's what you're thinking about. And I think that you mentioning that is a really important thing for people to hear and a lesson for people to really understand, and they should listen to that a few times.
Um, yeah, I feel like you can hear it a lot retroactively when people tell you how the race unfolded, and then the first thing people throw at you is like the bits that went wrong, and those are the things that were in their brain, kind of like making everything else go wrong after that, right? Something happens in T1, and all of a sudden the rest of your day kind of slowly unravels a little bit, and and then I feel like you talk to other people that maybe had a great race and they're like, yeah, I executed really well. Then maybe some point down the line, they're like, oh yeah, and I dropped all my nutrition in T1. But I figured it out and it was fine. And so, just where you put your focus. And I really do think that's important before the race as well. So like when someone asks you if you're ready, like if you give a negative answer, then like, your mind is listening to what you're saying to this person, and you're just kind of embedding those negative thoughts, so that, like you said, when on race day it gets hard, those negative thoughts are like they're just stacked up there ready to go. Whereas if you're thinking about and you're answering the question with like the things that have gone well, and like I'm not talking about being like hopelessly optimistic here, I'm talking about being, again, like I was saying, being ready to execute the race you've been prepared for. And so just being optimistic that like, hey, I am ready to do X, Y, and Z, which is what I'm here to do. So I'm stoked on that. I think that can do a lot for keeping keeping your mindset positive and keeping you in where you need to be when you're actually executing the race.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something to be said too, we're really hitting home on, hey, I have to execute these certain sessions in training to reply with the answer, am I ready? There is also absolutely the case of you might get through your preparation, not hit any of those. And you're still going to show up on race day and give everything that you have for what you were able to do. And I can tell you that there's a lot of especially long races like half Ironmans and Ironmans. There's a lot that goes into if you just keep pulling from within yourself of as much as you can, you'd be surprised even if you weren't able to hit those sessions that you had in mind that were the key ones that answer the question of yes, I feel totally ready. It sometimes won't matter, right? Like can I troubleshoot on the day? Can I just keep pushing forward? It'll become down to sort of that ability to just keep working hard even with whatever you go into the race. Again, like you said, not hopelessly optimistic. Like if you weren't able to train at all for 6 weeks going in and then you're going to try and do an Ironman, that might be, but to give an example. So for myself, one time I was going to Ironman Western Australia. I was swimming a lot. And what I mean by a lot, I was swimming about 9 times a week. So some like morning and evening sessions. In between, I was riding. So I was riding 6 days a week and a fair amount as well. I can't remember what the total hours were on that, but I wasn't able to run. I had a foot injury. And so I was water running and I was water running. I was water running in the morning and water running at night. So I'd do a swim session, water run for 30, 45 minutes afterwards, do my bike session, do a swim session, water run afterwards. So that was sort of like a really typical day for me. My Obviously going into the race, my swim and bike fitness was very high, but I had only done 1 hour run on the road. And so to expect to complete a marathon off of that, clearly I hadn't checked off any boxes of what are typical, hey, do I feel race ready to run an Ironman in the pro field at all? I hadn't even run over an hour on land. I had no idea if my foot would even hold up. And but I was doing everything I could and I was focused on what I could do and how well my preparation could be despite what I was working with. You know, what are the things I talk a lot about, what can you control, what you can't you control, and I made sure that I took care of the things that I could. And so, you know, when I ended up doing that race, I was able to complete the marathon and pretty well. I can't remember. I placed. I can't remember what it was. It wasn't the year that I was third, but I think I was fifth or sixth or something like that. So not a terrible day, you know. Um, and because of my years in the sport, and I was really fit with the swim and the water running and the bike, and I did everything that I could control, I was still able to have a pretty great Ironman. And so there is those things too. And I think that pulls back to what we were talking about, is focusing on the things that you were able to do well and not just stacking up the excuses. It would have been really easy for me going into that race to say, I haven't run in, you know, I think it had been like 3 or 4 months and I hadn't run over an hour on land. Like there was like a arsenal full of excuses of why I could have just DNF'd that race. So, you know, it's things like that too. So when I guess we started this conversation with, when someone asks you if you're ready, you know, looking at all of these elements. And I think the most important piece of people are going to pull from it is say, look at themselves as an athlete, what they've been able to do for training specifically in the last 3 years, and then in that race preparation, and then are my goals and expectations in line with that? And when I toe the line, you know, that expectations piece, and just respect for the length and the duration and the intensity of the event, and that the expectation lines up with what you've actually been able to do. And I think that story that I just told worked out, because prior to that injury, you know, I'd been training for years, like, you know, full marathon Ironman professional training. So it was a blip into that race. But if I again emphasize, look back on the last 3 years, there was a lot of run preparation. So, you know, it's good to look at the whole picture.
I found that to be a great summary, and the only part of that story I really didn't like is you talking about having to water jog so much, and that just makes my head hurt. So I'm sorry. Um,
In a tiny little pool in Thailand. Oh my God, I went around in so many circles. I think the pool wasn't any bigger than a little kiddie pool. It was like, yeah, I was doing
oh
free
my gosh,
skates and S turns and yeah.
that's rough.
Yeah.
Um, But I will say too, one thing that I've talked to athletes about in like similar situations, maybe not quite that extreme because that's pretty extreme, but is like the expectation for what things will feel like. And I feel like, you know, you had the fitness to complete that marathon and to run the marathon well, but like my guess is you were expecting that marathon to start hurting way earlier than marathons that start to hurt in the past. You know, maybe before you get to that 18, 20, 22 mile mark and things start to hurt a little bit. My guess is on that one, probably around 45 minutes or an hour, like things started to hurt and you're like, okay, here we go, buckle up because I've got whatever 2 more hours of running left, and not the usual 30 minutes that feels like crap. It's like 2 hours of feeling like my quads don't want to hit the ground again. um and
Right.
and I feel like though the point being though is like my guess is you were expecting that and you're like, yeah, my expectation is this is how the race is going to unfold. I'm ready for this to happen, and I'm like pretty ready physically and mentally for every step to hurt after 45 minutes. And I think that that's like also a really important thing of that being ready is like probably didn't feel like a typical Ironman marathon for you, you know. And but my guess is you were mentally prepared and like that was part of your game plan, that and so you were set up for success in that way, that like you weren't delusional. You were like, yeah, I can probably run a marathon, but it's not going to feel good. And I mean, I don't know, you correct me if I'm wrong, but my guess is that marathon hurt maybe a little bit more, but like you got it done pretty
Yeah,
quick.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's that whole expectations thing, right? Expectations is the big thing. And just having the ability to be honest with yourself too. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you know, one of our goals for this was to keep this one shorter. So I feel like that was a fun story besides the aqua jogging. So that was maybe people can glean a lot of information there, and you gave a nice little synopsis at the end there. So I feel like that's a great place to end it.
Yeah, thanks so much for listening. And if people, if they're ever wondering how do I work backwards for my race and get the most out of myself and set my goals and expectations, reach out to Jesse or myself, and we can help you work through those things. And um, you know, that is you can always find lots of helpful articles on my website and on Jesse's website, but definitely reach out if there's any questions people have on that stuff.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Marilyn.
Cheers.